Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is life illuminated. By Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan. Acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians, a Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology, look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Hello, welcome back to Access to Democracy. I'm Holly Jenkins, your guest host, and particularly honored to be here today introducing a first-time guest on the show, a man who is no stranger to politics. Welcome, Governor Arne Carlson, Minnesota's 37th governor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
Delighted.
We could talk about so many things right now, but let's start off the bat just talking a little bit about the Republican Party. And as a moderate, in the Republican Party, is there a spot for moderates in this era of Trump, in a time when we've seen the right wing of the Republican Party move farther away from balanced budgets and social policies, or more conservative social policies? What do you think, the good and the bad? And
well, I think this movement has been coming for a long time.
Okay.
And I don't think it's going to get better in the next several years. I really don't. I think what's very disappointing, and it's frankly true in both parties, and that is increasingly incumbents are more loyal to their party and to their political caucus than they are either to the state or the nation. And it's going to cause crisis after crisis until we, the public, take charge and say, no, your first and only loyalty is to the well-being of all of us.
Excellent. We did just have a visit from Donald Trump yesterday in a rally. It sparked, again, division here in Minneapolis, throughout the state, throughout the country. Is this the new... Is this trend going to continue? Are the
Well, I think Donald Trump is going to be Donald Trump. What you saw last night, I think it's only going to get worse.
So could you summarize just your thoughts on his administration, and again, if there's room for the moderate Republican in this era?
Well, it's a complete aberration from the norm. We have never seen this in American politics before, and it's frankly appalling. But aside from that, it's the responsibility of the members of Congress to proceed with not only the impeachment hearings, but to make sure that we have a trial in the Senate and that both political parties weigh the evidence and come to a verdict. And this nonsense that you can put loyalty to party and to Trump before loyalty to the nation, that's extraordinarily harmful and strikes at the heart of democracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not what our founding fathers had in mind.
Absolutely. You have encouraged the Democratic Party to engage with moderate Republicans and independents in this upcoming election.
Yeah.
And
don't just invite them in, but try to understand and adopt some of their philosophies. I mean, our country is suffering from a burden of debt that we cannot carry. And we're going to be asking, not just the generations after us, but we're going to be asking ourselves in later years that we're going to have sacrifices. Because the more interest you pay, the less money you have available for disposable income to spend on education, environment, et cetera. And that's happening right now.
Okay. Would you say that right now there's several Democratic candidates, are any of these standing out to you that you feel you could support their vision, and also do they have a good sense of good governance? Are we ever going to get back to that? What do you think of the current candidates?
You really get to it right off the bat,
sure,
huh?
why not? We only
no.
have 26 minutes.
Well, you're very kind. No, frankly, I'm going to support the opposition to Donald Trump. It will be an improvement, a sizable improvement, no question about it.
So no one at this point that you're seen as the
Yeah, but I'm
future
afraid if I
vision.
endorse that individual, probably hurt him or her more
Okay.
than help, so I'll remain silent for the moment.
All right, we'll ask you next time.
Thank you.
So the shift in the Republican Party is also visible here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And during the 90s, you worked through some economic struggles in the state, as well as social policy. It wasn't easy. There was partisanship then, and there were fights and battles, but you got through the gridlock. What is happening today? What has changed since your decade in office, in the governor's office?
Well, I think what has changed is that in our day, public policy was number one, and politics was a vehicle with which to implement public policy. Now it's all politics. And public policy is frankly very, very low on the scale, very low. It's all about how do I get elected, and when elected, how do I stay in office? And if I have to avoid controversies or avoid showing leadership or avoid any concerns for the future that may antagonize somebody, I'm silent. And it's extraordinarily harmful, extraordinarily harmful.
Right. When in the 90s, you worked through some trying issues and policies regarding health care, and it was your administration that established MinCare to provide health care for people who couldn't afford other types of insurance or health care. So right now, and that was a bipartisan effort, it became a national model. So commendable. Today, we're at gridlock over one simple issue, of providing insulin, emergency access to insulin for people who need it. Now, at the end of last session, this language that presumably had bipartisan support was pulled out of in the Senate, and it disappeared. So it appears as though this issue alone is just, they're going to continue to battle over it while individuals are rationing their insulin and dying. What would you suggest people do to get a fire under the legislators to get this policy taken care of? What can people do? If the legislators aren't getting it done, people need to get more engaged.
I've always felt that it's up to the governor to drive the agenda. That's what governors do. And their job doesn't end with the end of legislative session. That just is the start of the new session. And that's where you start to build common ground. You meet legislators, you have your commissioners, your assistant commissioners going out, meeting with legislators, finding out what common ground can we have. I can't think of anything that we got through the legislature that wasn't bipartisan. We had to be because we had Democrat control of both the House and the Senate. So there was no choice. Either you don't govern or you govern with. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with liking your opponent. I'm so tired of this bitterness and this anger. I found the speakers of the House to be very workable. I thought the role they played was excellent. I respected it, and I respected what they did. I loved working with Roger Moe. Even when we were at odds, the question always was, okay, where do you think he'll meet, and where do you think you're willing to meet? And ultimately, you did meet. But I do think it was a day when public policy had much higher standing than is the case today.
Yeah. Well, today it almost seems as though you are looked down on by your party members if you compromise or collaborate with the other side.
Yeah, what nonsense.
And not just that, but when a minority, when you're in the minority, oftentimes you cannot get your bill heard in session. And to me, that is just one of the most flawed processes, because by silencing even the introduction of bills, it takes away the public's voice to be able to be part of that process through public hearings and whatnot. So they've really, the way it's currently set up, they are just conflicting with what democracy should be in a representative government. They're keeping people out of the discussion.
I remember, I think it was roughly 1971, a whole group of very talented young Democrats came into the legislature. Tom Berg, Harry Sieben, Ray Farrisee, there was a whole group, and they were bright. And they saw the Republicans, the old Republicans, running a very autocratic ship. And that was denying people's right to be heard, automatically adjourning session when anything arbitrary to your interest was occurring. It was a very, very harmful, undemocratic system. And in '73, they came back with this new majority, and gosh, were they good.
Oh, yeah.
They opened up the whole process, and by the way, that meant that your bill could be heard.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the Democrats have since rescinded that rule. There was really an implicit understanding when they took over that everything would be open, the process would be open. Now we're talking about a process where the loyalty is to the caucus and not to the public, not to the people they serve, and it's a closed process. That is very, very frightening and very undemocratic.
I would completely agree, and it just underscores the fundamental disconnect between voters and their elected representatives.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Have you ever heard any political candidate of any political party ever standing before an audience and saying, elect me and I'm going to give my vote to the caucus? Elect me and I'll be more loyal to my party than I will be to you? But that's precisely what's happening. We see that in Washington with Republicans, and we see that here in Minnesota with Democrats.
Yeah.
Very frightening.
And people are just being left out of
Totally
they're
left
not
out.
Invited to the table.
Totally,
So one of the
absolutely.
issues that's a timely issue here in Minnesota, and it's interesting that sulfide mining or copper-nickel mining, this issue has come up. There are two mines that are being considered permitted to open up mines. These mines would not only threaten the pristine waters of the Boundary Waters wilderness, but at the possibility of irreversible damage to that environment is very real, and it would come at the taxpayers' expense for now and future generations. So on this issue, you don't hear many legislators taking a public stand. You don't see any public hearings. What is happening? Why is the legislature remaining and the governor remaining so silent on this issue, and why are people not being invited to the table?
Well, I'm not so sure I can answer the totality of the question, but I can certainly give you a partial answer. One is that both political parties want to control the North, which is the 8th political district, the 8th congressional district. Trump carried it and carried it quite handily, and frankly, it's moving more and more to this right-wing republicanism. The Democrats are trying to cling to it. And then we don't know the extent of the dark money that gets pumped in by international corporations to national political parties and drifts into legislative races. We know nothing about that because it's undisclosed. That's why it's called dark. The third thing is that it's loyalty to the caucus. And so metropolitan legislators, for instance, their constituents would be the last ones that would want to place the waters of Lake Superior and the BWCA in any form of jeopardy. But yet they're silent. Overall, they're basically silent.
Right.
There were a handful that have signed a letter led by John Marty to meet with the governor, at least. They did, and nothing transpired. And it's stonewalling. So what we're seeing is curious. Democrats in Minnesota stonewalling on Polymet, and Trump and Republicans stonewalling in Washington. It's an exercise in hypocrisy, you might say.
Well, and again, bringing the public back into the fold here, I know there's been meetings between Governor Walz and representatives of Glencore, which is the Swiss conglomerate that has a horrible record, both on human rights and on environmental integrity. Is that the kind of company that we want to do business with in Minnesota? And why is Governor Walz unwilling to meet with those organizations who have a different view?
Let's start from the beginning. First of all, states and any government has an obligation to plan its tomorrow. In order to do that, you've got to have a very good understanding of what are your assets and what are your liabilities. Your liabilities being a challenge that you have to overcome. I came to Minnesota in 1957, and that was the times of the ham beer ad. land of sky blue waters and these bears popping up and everybody enjoying the fresh, pristine water of Minnesota. I thought I had gone to heaven. Now, that's one of our most valuable assets. Why would you ever place that in harm's way with the, by the way, even under the best of circumstances, the very best of circumstances, 3% of all the contaminants from mining will flow into Lake Superior and into the BWCA. That means arsenic and mercury coming into their drinking water.
And that's the best case scenario.
That's the best case.
Yep.
The governor refuses a health study. That's incredible, if not inhuman. They refuse any kind of review of the financial agreement, which, by the way, is with Polymet. It's a Canadian corporation. And for those in the audience that know anything about financial statements, they have, the only thing Polymet has on its financial statement is a debt of about $283 million to Glencore. They have no assets and they have no revenue. Now, how in the world are they going to pay anybody's liability? They don't have enough money to insure a bicycle. And yet we can't get a single public hearing. The Republicans are blocking hearings in the Senate and Democrats are blocking it in the House.
And, you know, on this issue, it's relatively a partisan issue, and yet there's several Democrats who are unwilling to take a position in favor of clean water for this this issue. What is happening on the DFL side, who normally are shining stars when it comes to environment protection, and yet here we are about to poison Lake Superior, the St. Louis River, the Boundary Waters watershed, thousands of acres of wetlands. Where is the Democrats' voice?
Very, very silent. I've spoken to some of their environmental leaders, and they both say the same thing, and that is that on a good day, we can get a handful or so of good votes. John Marty, I think, was able to summon as many as 20. Well, out of a legislative body of 201, that's about 10%. That's a sad, sad case. But let me just emphasize this. This is not an environmental issue. This is a quality of life issue. This is the drinking water that affects the state of Minnesota. By the way, if these mines are expanded, and they will be, that's going to come into the Mississippi River, which is the drinking water for the bulk of the state of Minnesota, and it's going to come into the St. Croix. So we will have nothing left.
Right.
We should be having hearings all over the place. I mean, think about the juxtaposition of having hearings on marijuana all over the state. My gosh, they're busy selling the idea that we have to have a robust flow of marijuana. Not one single hearing on sulfite mining and the damage it's going to do to the quality of our water. Then when you do some research, you dig up some things that are very interesting. The number of Polymet people in the administration. The chief of staff to Governor Walz was in the law firm that represented Polymet just prior to his coming to the Walz staff. The deputy chief of staff and their chief attorney was not only a member of the same law firm, but he was the outside counsel for Polymet. Here are the papers he filed on December 28th, resigning his account with Polymet, and a few days later, he's suddenly number 2 on the governor's staff.
Seems like an absolute,
Well, yeah, and
on
then
this important issue. It might not be unlawful to appoint someone like this, but it certainly seems like a poor judgment to bring in.
Well, and by the way, that's not the end of it. We then have the chief policy advisor coming out of Tom Bach's operation in the state Senate, and he is the leader of the Polymet forces. So her loyalty is to who? And then her husband is the spokesperson at the PCA defending what? Defending the corrupt process that took place on the water permit that allowed Polymet to get the permit in the first place.
And even that.
So what we have here is corruption in the PCA and the DNR. We have the DNR and the PCA requesting the federal government to withhold vital health data from the public. That is what corruption is about. And yet the governor refuses to investigate, the attorney general refuses to investigate, and they say, well, it's the court's responsibility. That's not true. It is the governor's responsibility.
Okay.
And it is the legislature's responsibility to provide oversight and hold public hearings. That's how the system functions. You can't argue one political philosophy in Washington and then the opposite political philosophy in Minnesota, and that's precisely what's happening. So I really hope that your show will bring on, for instance, I'd love to talk to some of the members of the opposite viewpoint
Oh,
and have a debate.
yes, that would be an
A
excellent,
good, robust
an
debate.
excellent
You
show. We'll
bet.
get that on the schedule.
But more than anything else, if everything I've said is a falsehood, what better place to deal with it than in a public hearing?
Well, and that's the point, that the public is not invited to any of these discussions. These have
No.
all been taking place behind closed doors. The MCCA conflict there, the corruption there, and our governor is not saying anything about it.
No.
It's as though
The politics of getting elected is infinitely more important to these people
yeah.
than serving the long-term well-being of the public. I mean, think about it. When you look at Minnesota and you look at its assets, on one hand, you've got one of the strongest healthcare systems in the world, led by the Mayo Clinic, the University of Minnesota, and the partnerships that have been formed, the superb number of hospitals that we have, truly number one. Then you look at its natural asset and its water.
Yeah. And water,
And we're not even, by the way, 40% of Minnesota's lakes and streams are polluted now. 40%. Have you heard anybody say we have to have at least a study on what's taking place so that we can come up with some strategies to change this course? No, nothing. And part of the reason is they don't want to get into the polymet debate. Anything to avoid hurting polymet.
okay.
And by the way, polymet, as I said, has no assets. So how are they going to hold us harmless?
Right.
It's
But
Glencore,
has
the international bad boy,
yeah.
by the way, which is currently being investigated by the American government, currently under investigation in England, and has been an international rogue on virtually every continent for
And
walking away from its promises, walking away from its deals, child labor, bribery, laundering of money. I think that's the charge in the United States. They launder money. And you raised the question quite appropriately, why in the world would we ever want to go to bed with them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you did, you want that contract aired out hour after hour after hour, and you want the best attorneys to represent the public in a public hearing so there's a real public understanding, and you want upfront money so they can't walk away. How do you sue a Swiss corporation?
Right.
You can't
It's
take
as
them to
though there's-
district court.
It's as though they're just our currently elected officials are turning a blind eye to something that is going to be very damaging to our state and to future generations for the cost of it, not to mention the clean water. And clean water is turning into, the next round of gold. I mean, we
Thank you.
Yeah, we need to be
Yes.
protecting that clean water. Once it's gone, it's Flint, Michigan is still reeling
you.
the
Yes.
the damage from their impact and poor decisions by elected leaders behind closed doors. And we're seeing the same thing happening here in Minnesota. So thank you. You've put out some very strong position points and information for people to learn about on your Facebook page. And I just thank you for helping to raise a little bit more of a spotlight on some of the hidden pieces to this debate.
Well, delighted. Thank you very much.
One other area I want to tackle a couple things, but you, since leaving the governor's office, you did not run for any other positions, but you have certainly remained very active in politics. Giving speeches, promoting, endorsing candidates, and taking a position on matters such as polymet and clean water. Your legacy is phenomenal, and
Well,
so
you're very kind.
it's something that you should be that I just commend, and I'm so honored to be sitting here talking with you. But I do want to ask: are you at all concerned about your position and your strong feelings on sulfide mining and what's happening in our current legislation, do you think that will tarnish your legacy at all, or will it only make it better?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think you should live for a legacy, frankly. I don't want to drop names, but I will. I had lunch yesterday with Walter Mondale.
Oh,
I just find him a delightful
Excellent.
person, and we just had and we did partially touch on this.
yeah.
The joy of getting involved in public debate and public service is that it is a joyful experience. It really and truly is. And at the end of the day, if you feel you've done the right thing and that you haven't been in the back pocket of a special interest and you really have served the people to the best of your ability, it's a very rewarding feeling. It truly
Absolutely.
is. But it also doesn't stop. And by the way, Walter Mondale is strongly opposed to sulfite mining. And he's been outspoken on that as well.
Yeah.
And I think the Democratic Party would be well served to get back to the strength that they had as it's not just an environmental party, but the quality of life party.
Well, and as you've said that the environmental legacy of Theodore Roosevelt, he was Republican. We should all be striving for an environmental legacy.
Of course,
so it doesn't, it's surprising in some ways that issue comes across as more partisan than it should be.
Well, look
because
at
it
the
is
role
quality
of
life.
Miles
Yeah.
Lord. The older I get, the more I celebrate his life. I mean, he was an ardent Democrat, a very partisan Democrat. But boy, if he hadn't made that kind of ruling, and if he had taken a conservative approach to his judicial responsibility instead of a more liberal approach, we'd still have tailings being poured into Lake Superior.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great act of courage. And then the Democrats have a fine example of a gentleman I served under, and that was Willard Munger as chairman of the Environmental Committee.
Okay.
And to the chair of the Environmental Committee in the House and the Senate, I say, follow Willard Munger's path. And I can tell you one thing. Nobody would have told Willard Munger that there will be no hearings on this.
Right.
He would have been holding hearings all over the state of Minnesota.
Well, we'll keep striving to make that happen as
Oh,
best
I'd
we
love it.
can. If people can speak up and start just shouting from the rooftops, we want to have public hearings on these
Great.
issues. It would
With
be
you
helpful.
all the way.
I have one more topic to ask you about.
Fire
We've got a Gopher Nebraska game coming up tomorrow. What's your prediction? And are you going to be there at that wet, cold?
No, I've got a wedding tomorrow night, by the way, which is outside.
Oh boy. Okay.
So
I hope they have
that's
plan
going to
B.
be fascinating. I know. I think the Gophers will win. They have a very, very strong ground game. They really do. It's going to be mucky weather, so that favors the ground game. And two, I think we're going to be fortunate in the sense that Nebraska's not going to have its quarterback or their best receiver, so they're kind of limping in.
That helps.
But when it comes to a home game under adverse weather, I'll bet on Minnesota any day of the week.
I think you do most of the time.
Absolutely.
So thank you. We need more people like you who are true to their convictions, who are willing to talk about tough issues and debate them respectfully and thoughtfully. So
Well, I'm honored. Thank you
I am
very
so
much.
happy to have you on the show. Thank you again. It's been my privilege.
My pleasure.
All
Thank
right,
you.
We'll see you again.
Delighted.
you.
Thank you.